Hi guys, this is Robin. Welcome to History with Robin. I'm glad that you guys could join me. Hello to everyone who's joining. We are going to continue to talk about the Revolutionary War. And I know some of you guys are going to ask what my costume is today, because it's maybe not the same as all the other days. But here at the Delphian school where I work and where I'm doing the webinars from, we're doing a virtual spirit week so that our students who are away and alumni and parents and everybody, we're all coming together and we're dressing as a theme every day of the week. And today is Represent Your Country, wear the colors of your flag. So I'm wearing my red, white, and blue today, and I figured since we're talking about the Revolutionary War, it works too, because we're going to be talking about the beginning of the country of America. So let's see, I think there's a bunch of you guys. I'm so glad all of you guys could join me. I'm going to put up my slideshow so that you can see what we're going to be talking about. Shayna, tomorrow we're not going to do one, but I will be doing one next week. So the next one after today that I'll be doing will be next Tuesday. I'm so glad, Denali and Mackenzie, that you guys are enjoying the history lessons. I love that you guys love history and that you enjoy my costumes. Thank you guys so much. So here we are, History with Robin. We're going to be talking about how the Americans formed a new country. And we're going to be talking about one of the important people. His name was James Madison, who helped with forming the new country, the system of government that we have now. But before we talk about James Madison, we're going to talk a little bit about the government that the colonists formed and some of the things they liked and didn't like. Shayna, the Spirit Week thing for tomorrow is green. So because we are the Delphi Dragons and our color is green, we are all going to be wearing as much green as we can tomorrow. Ariana, I am just dressed up as an American, someone who likes red, white, and blue. I could be the flag, though I know you guys will probably say I don't look like the flag that Betsy Ross made. Okay, so let's get started. So by winning the Revolutionary War, which we talked a little bit about yesterday, if you were with me, the 13 colonies, they won their independence from Britain, and there was a lot to celebrate. But with this new freedom, you might think that there might be no more work to do. They won the war, right? But winning the war was only the beginning of the struggle, of the hard work they were going to have to do. Now they had to figure out how to govern themselves. So to govern means to have control over, to direct, or to manage. So if you are governing a project, you're the one that's in charge of it, and you're telling the other people where to go, what to do, and what to get done. And the people who run and control or manage the country, they're called the government. So it comes from that word, govern. In Britain, and actually in most of the world that time, the type of government was called a monarchy. And a monarchy is a government that's ruled by a king or queen. So those in the colonies, which were now called states, knew one thing for sure. They knew what they didn't want. And why do you think? Oh, they didn't want to have a king. They knew that for sure. So why do you think they felt that way? Well, there are a couple of reasons. They just had a really bad time being governed by a king, King George III of England. And it wasn't that he was a horrible man or that he was very terrible or anything like that, but he had so much power over the colonies, and the people who lived in the colonies, they had so little power within the area where they lived. So if he got angry about something and he made a mistake, things could happen and the colonists couldn't do anything about it. Some examples of that is when they were forced to pay high tax on tea. high taxes on tea, pay a lot of money to be able to buy or sell tea. Or before the Revolutionary War, there was a time period where British soldiers had to live in the colonists' house, and the colonists couldn't say anything about that. So I know I wouldn't like it if somebody, suddenly said that a soldier had to live in my house and I had no say. So the colonists really didn't like that either. Okay, let's see. Abel, that's a great question. What's the difference between a king and a president? A president is elected by, chosen by the people of the country to lead them. A king it's passed down through families. So if a man was the first king, then his son would be the next one, and his grandson would be the next one, and so on, and continue that way. So there was no say in who the king would be. But when you have a president is elected, and the people of the country get to choose. That's such a great question to ask for this one. Kiosha, great question. Was the king unfair? Is that a reason? I'm sure he didn't think he was being unfair, but the people who lived with his rules felt that it was a little unfair to them to have to do that. Yes, Annette, that is a picture of King George III. That is to the right. Isaiah, we don't have a king because the system that we developed, which I'm going to talk about in the next couple slides, was because we decided that we didn't want to have a king. We wanted to have someone who represented us. These are all really great questions. Okay, so 5 years before the war, in 1777, the leaders of the 13 states fighting to be independent created a plan. So even before they'd won the war, they created this plan to unite them as one country, the United States of America. But to avoid the problems they were trying to escape from, which was the king being very powerful and being able to pass laws and make rules, and then them not having any say in it, they decided in the beginning to make the government very weak, just powerful enough to help the states cooperate and get along. And this very first plan that they wrote was called the Articles of Confederation. And I'm going to tell you what those words mean. So articles is just a word for a written document, and a confederation is a group of states or nations that come together to work together. So that was that document that talked about the confederation, the states that and how they were going to work together, which sounds like it should be perfect, right? It sounds like it's exactly what they want. Some great questions. Why did someone need a soldier in their house? King George sent the soldiers over to protect the colonists and to protect the colony, and he needed a place for them to live, so then he decided to have them live in the people's house. It also was that he was quite upset about what's called the Boston Tea Party, where some men called the Sons of Liberty in Boston went on ships that had tea from England and dumped what was worth $2 million today of tea in the harbor. So that was very upsetting to him. And besides needing a place to have soldiers live when they came, he was pretty upset with the colonists. So you guys are asking such great questions as always. So what they decided to do even before they won the war was they were going to write down all of the things. They were going to make this document of how the states were going to work together, and it was going to be perfect, and they were going to live happily ever after. But it didn't really work. So it wasn't working well. And there was a group called Congress that their job was to talk about things and to make laws. But mostly they just ended up talking. They weren't really doing anything super effective. They had no real power over the states. So these men could talk about what laws they wanted to have happen, but maybe the state of Virginia would say, no, we don't want that. And there wasn't anything they could do about it. Or another state might do something, might print its own money, for example. So maybe there was money that was printed by the state of New York, and maybe Virginia had its own money that it printed. And as you can imagine, that might make it hard to do business because you'd have to be switching back and forth behind all this, between all this money. So that was just an example of how the states had a lot of power to make their own decisions, and it ended up where they maybe weren't always cooperating or working together. And there was no president to help direct things or kind of move the government or the country in a specific direction. And that made America as a country very weak. And in 1783, can you guess which country really liked America being weak? It was Britain. They wanted it to be weak. They didn't want it to work out. So King George was watching very, very carefully, and he was hoping that the United States or America's plan to govern themselves would fail, and that he could easily take back his American colonies. Unfortunately, by 1787, things still hadn't improved much. There were still the problems where the states were not, there wasn't a lot of cooperation between the states. And the government of the United States didn't have much money and no real power. So the Americans, they needed a better way of making the kind of government that they wanted, where they could have all the things they wanted, but also where it would work and it would achieve its goals. Who's that in the picture, Lorna? Great question. This picture that's to the right is somebody called Uncle Sam, which is, if you were with me yesterday, we talked about a patriotic icon, like a person who stands for something that's patriotic or shows a great love of their country. Uncle Sam is sort of like that. He is the person that represents our country. You guys maybe have heard people say that, like Uncle Sam. Sometimes people use it to refer to the government as well. What a great question. What is he doing in that picture? He's showing that he has no money. So sometimes you keep money in your pockets, and usually when you pull your pockets out like that, it just shows that you don't have any money. So it's just a picture that kind of shows that the United States at that time didn't have any really real money. What a great question. So the Americans, they needed a new system. They needed a new government that would be the way they wanted, but would also be effective and help them. So the Americans, sorry, just one second, sorry, looked around the world to see if any other countries had governments that worked and where the people still had freedom and power. Those two things were very important, to work and to maintain or to keep the freedom and power of the citizens. But there weren't any. They couldn't find any when they were looking around. So they had no examples to help them to make a better government unless they started to look back at history. So that was exactly what they did. So fortunately, there were many people in America back then who had studied history, and James Madison was one of them. So he knew that well over 2,000 years before, people in Greece and then in Rome had formed governments where the people got to have a say, where they could say what they wanted to have happen. They could vote on things. They could use their voice to influence the government and to get what they wanted. So he went to work studying history to be able to find some good ideas to help America. You're right, Lorna, it was a republic. Great guess. So James Madison, at this time when he started working on this project, he was 36 years old. He'd been born in 1751 in Virginia, and he was the oldest of his 11 brothers and sisters. I can't imagine having 11 brothers and sisters. That's a lot of kids. At 18, he went to the College of New Jersey at Princeton. So when the Revolutionary War started, he tried to fight as a soldier, but he was too small. He was only 5 feet 4 inches tall, and he never weighed over 100 pounds. So they didn't want him to be a soldier because he was too small. I like to joke that he's kind of like the Steve Rogers or Captain America of the Revolutionary War, except he didn't get this super serum, which turned him into a super soldier. But he was like that, where he wanted to fight and he wanted to contribute, but he actually wasn't strong enough or big enough to be able to do that. The other thing that happened was that he got sick a lot. So that obviously wasn't a good thing for a soldier. Kiyosha, great question. What if the king or queen had no siblings or kids? Who would be the next king or queen when the king or queen dies? So it would just pass on to a family member. So it might be to a cousin, or in monarchies, in systems of government where they have kings and queens, they have all the people who are the descendants of the king or the queen who have a certain order of who would become king or queen next. So, and it goes on and on. So it might be their children, then their grandchildren, then maybe their nieces and nephews, and so on. That's a great question. Yes, Lorna, you're right. He probably would have made a good spy. I'm not quite sure. I think it might have been because they recognized that James Madison was really smart and he was really well educated. So they wanted to use him for something more than just being a soldier. So he basically, so instead of being a soldier, he, in 1776, he was elected to the government of West Virginia, and he helped them to organize it into a state. I see a couple of you guys have raised your hands. I don't have a way that I can use that function on this webinar, but if you want to type your question into the Q&A box, I will try to answer it. Thomas Jefferson was in that government as well, and they worked together and became friends. They became friends because they had many similar ideas about government and freedom. Let's see if I can answer some questions. I am dressed up as an American flag or a patriotic person today, mostly because we're doing a virtual Spirit Week at the school where I work, and today is Wear Your Flag. So I thought, since we're talking about the beginning of the American government, it would be great to be able to wear that. So James Madison couldn't be a soldier, but they wanted to use him. He wanted to be useful. And so he started working for the government of Virginia and figuring out how to make it be a state. So because of his governmental experience working in Virginia, Madison was able to see that in a state, what worked and what didn't, what was good, what was bad, what was helpful and what wasn't helpful. Alaya, you are right. I do look like a sailor. The costume I'm wearing is a Halloween costume that I wore last year for Halloween, where I was a person who worked at a sailor-themed ice cream shop. So you are right. You definitely, good job for guessing that I look like a sailor, because that is definitely what that looks like. Gaia 3, we're talking about James Madison and how he helped build helped contribute to building the government of the United States. Somebody asked, the picture to the right, is actually a picture of ancient Greece. So when James Madison started to study history to look for the best government system that he could, he started to study ancient Greece and Rome to see how he could make a government that would govern over the states work. First was Greece. So 2,600 years ago, Greece developed democracy. Democracy is a type of government when a large number of people get to be part of making the laws and running the government. So it was a really amazing improvement, but it had its problems. And here are what some of these problems were. Sorry, guys, just one second. Just want to pull my questions up to see. So, earlier, oops, sorry, guys. I went in the wrong direction. So that picture on the right, that's all of those people coming together and being able to vote on the making of the laws. But some of the problems were this. So one of the problems is that people had other jobs in ancient Greece when they all got to have a say in the making of the government and the laws. And it was hard to do those other laws if they also had to spend a long time voting and talking about laws and making laws. So for another thing, if there were 100 people and 51, the majority, voted for something they wanted to do something bad to the other 49, the minority, the majority would win. So for instance, if we were having a water balloon fight and there were 100 of us and 51 of us decide that we want to throw, and 51 of us decide that we want to throw water balloons and really soak the other 49, even if the other 49 don't want it, we're in the majority. So we win. So we get to do that. So that can sometimes happen, and that can be not great. So has it ever happened to you where you're part of a group that was kind of outvoted by the majority and you didn't get to do what you wanted? Like maybe it's a choice between watching 2 movies and you have to watch the other movie that most of the people want. It's just not always, it's not always great. That's kind of not a super serious example, but maybe you don't like that. In a direct democracy like they had in Greece, everyone voted directly on everything. So all the people voted on everything and the majority always got their way. And being in the minority was not fun because you didn't have a say in how things. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to catch up. Kiosha, I'm sorry that you can't see my face. Hopefully that will sort out. Let's see some questions. Yes, Lorna, people would be excluded and they didn't like that. Rome and Greece were definitely good. And they were an improvement on the earlier systems, but they weren't perfect. The picture, I think, that's being shown is just somebody being left out, kind of to show that. Yes. Yes, it's not great to be excluded, so it's not nice to not be in that majority. So about 100 years after the Greeks started their democracy, the Romans tried something very similar. They wanted to see if they could improve upon it. But instead of a direct democracy where everyone voted on everything, they invented this idea, which is called a representative democracy. So most people got to vote, but only they got to vote for the people that would represent them in the government. That person who they chose would then do the voting on the laws. They called this a republic, but they called it the Republic, the Republic of Rome. So for instance, if you guys are voting, you could vote to have me represent you, and then I would go and I would vote on the laws and help make them to do and follow or listen to what you guys said. But this wasn't actually perfect either. And does anybody know maybe why that wasn't perfect? April, thanks for joining us. We're talking about the new country that the colonies formed after they won the Revolutionary War. So here's one of the reasons that it wasn't totally perfect. Sorry, just one second, guys. Those representatives, they could be bribed with money to vote the way the rich people wanted. So if I were a rich person and I wanted the law to be a certain way, probably to help me, I could give money to that representative and maybe they would vote for that just to help me out. So that's not great. Still, the Roman Republic lasted for hundreds of years and was in many, many ways better than a monarchy because the people still had a say in how they were governed. In 1787, Madison had studied the best ideas of the ancient Greeks and Romans and added in some good ideas of his own. So he took those things that he had studied and he started thinking, that how he might like to do this. This, I think, is a picture of James Madison. So in 1787, when the leaders from each of the states came together in Philadelphia, they made what was called a constitution for the new government that would be over all the states. Constitution means how something is put together and how in the United States, we talk about it, it's how our government is formed. It writes down all the parts of the government and how they work together and sort of the rules that are followed about doing that. And this is how the government would be put together, this piece of writing called the Constitution. It would be the highest law of the land, which means it would be the thing that would set out the rules or the laws that the government would have to follow. So James Madison, they invited representatives from every colony, more than one, and James Madison was invited as one of Virginia's representatives, and he put his ideas into what he called the Virginia Plan. And this is just a picture of him with the Virginia Plan. Lorna, great question. Yes, we do still follow this plan of government today. We are a republic, and the people of the United States can vote for the people that they want to represent them. That is a great question. That is a great thing. So others put in their own plans. This is a picture, these guys on the right, this is the picture of these men who gathered together to be able to write the Constitution and be able to put in the different laws of the land. So James Madison brought his plan, the Virginia Plan. Others put in their own plans. In the end, the Constitution was a blend of all these plans and ideas, but much of it came from James Madison and his ideas. And that's why today we call him the father of the Constitution. So after they had all these meetings and they put together all these plans and they came up with how they wanted to do it, on September 17th, 1787, the representatives from the states signed it. But the rest of the people in the states still had to agree that it would become a law. So what they did was these men put it together, they came up with an agreement, and then the states themselves had to agree to it. And so that took 2 years. So by 1789, that was done as well. And the United States, they had a new government. Yes, Lorna, that is a picture of them signing the Constitution. So what was this new government like? It had three main part or branches. A Congress, which is the area this is the group that makes the laws for the United States. They're made up of elected representatives. They make the laws. They're elected, those representatives are elected by the people in the state. The next branch was a president who helped enforce the laws, and a court to take care of any fights or disputes about the law. Each branch was supposed to be equal. None were more powerful than the others. But also, the Congress was divided into two parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. These are all things that we still have today in our government. The idea was that the government would be powerful enough to keep the states cooperating and work together, but not so powerful that it could take away the power of the states or take away people's rights or freedoms. So they had to balance those two things. They wanted it to be powerful enough, but not too powerful. The people would have some power over the government and have a say about what happens. They could be able to decide. Many people think it's the best form of government in history, but most people think it isn't perfect. The fact is, the people who wrote it didn't think it was perfect either, but they put it in a way that people could improve it in the future, and they put it in a way where it was the solution to their problem. That they wanted to form as a country and keep the country strong, but also not have to give up any of their freedoms. So the way that people change the Constitution, even now and in the past, is called making an amendment. When you amend something, you change it to either make it better or to make improvements to it. And if enough people in the states want to make a change to the Constitution, they write an amendment. And then if that's agreed to by the majority of the states, then the Constitution's changed. And one of the things that they did right away to change the Constitution was to write something called the Bill of Rights, which maybe some of you guys have already heard of. Emma and Zoe, yes, we do have a president of the United States. All those things I talked about in the last slide, the courts, the president, and the Congress, the two houses of Congress to make the laws is the way that our laws are formed now. So the Bill of Rights changed the Constitution to add in 10 different amendments, things such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and that made it much better. But there were still many problems, and over the years, people have been making many more improvements. Since the time that the Bill of Rights was written, people have decided to add 16 more amendments to the Constitution. Thank you guys for helping me keep a time on it. We are actually almost done. We might even end off a couple minutes early. So as for James Madison, he went on to become the 4th president of the United States in 1809, and he served 2 terms, which means he was president for a total of 8 years. I can imagine he must have been very proud to be elected president under the system of the government that he largely designed. So a lot of the things that he ended up benefiting from as president or experiencing as president were actually ideas that he was able to contribute. And despite being sick often and weak, he lived a very long life, not dying until 1836 at the age of 85. By that time, he could see how successful the young country he'd helped build had become. And I'm sure that made him even more proud. Let's see if I can answer a couple. That's actually all I have. Who's in the picture? This picture is James Madison. It was probably one of the many portraits that was made of him. Milo, I'm not sure if he lived in the White House. I forget which president the White House was created during the White House that we think of and know today, but that would be a great research question. Isaiah, yes, great guess. I am Robin from Scoops Ahoy from Stranger Things, for those of you guys that know that. So thank you guys. So that was just the next in how the new government was formed. I just wanted to let you know, if you guys are interested in learning more about the courses that we study here or the things that we do, a lot of that, which is I base my seminar off of, you guys can check out Heron Books, and we actually have a promo code if there's any books or things that you guys are interested in buying. Well, thank you guys so much for joining my webinar. You guys were great as always, ask such great questions, and thank you. I love the questions you guys ask because it helps me think of history in different ways, and it just is really interesting stuff you guys want to know. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see you guys next time. I'm going to do, my next one is on Tuesday. So if you're interested in studying more about history, please join me then. Okay, bye guys. Have a good day.